Welcome to Gurdjieff Unveiled, Introduction to Gurdjieff's Teachings. This is session 8 and the last session. Today we're going to talk about our tasks for the previous week, and then we'll go into the meditation technique that we use in the Gurdjieff teaching, which involves sensing and sitting quietly. Later, we'll talk about Gurdjieff's life, which most of you do not know about. We'll be touching upon it superficially because really nobody knows exactly what his life, what happened in his life, or what it actually consisted of. But we have ideas based on his writings and people who have known him in the past for decades. I think you'll find that interesting. And our task was to examine our observations during the week with regard to sensing or internal considering. Did you notice that your attention was divided? Did you feel offended by anybody who you met was that you were being internally considerate about, and did you work on external considering to, neutralize your feelings and observations regarding that event? It is important that with this particular exercise, you're actually separating yourself from yourself. So if this is what self-observation is, and if you can't do that, you're going to have trouble, working on yourself. You'll be having difficulty with the exercise for a long time, particularly remembering to do it several times a day. But eventually you will get to the point where you can separate yourself from yourself and be able to externally be considerate towards others. And in that way, you can see how you have reacted when you've been asleep in the past. Yesterday, I was at a convenience store, and I was picking up a bottle of milk and a pastry, and there were two people in front of me. Well, about 10 minutes later, I managed to reach the cashier. These people were, very nice people. They were, they talked quite a bit, and they bought some lottery tickets, and they fidgeted with their wallets to make payments and stuff like that. And so they really took their sweet time. But they only had a few items, but it was such a long time. And I looked behind me, and there were 3 or 4 other people. Fortunately, I did not internally consider, but there might have been maybe a little flavoring of frustration on my part. But, I felt, warmth and love towards those people. Maybe it was a result of being the work for so many, many, many years. But that's what it's all about. I could have easily gotten frustrated, impatient, returned the items and walked out of the store, but there was no sense in that. I mean, I didn't have a deadline. So I had a choice. I could go one way or the other, and I just, waited. And, that's the result of working on myself over a period of a long time. But you do have a choice of being internally considerate or externally considerate. And if you remember to self-observe, you retain that energy you normally would have wasted, that would have leaked out. And that energy is now available for future efforts of working on myself. So internal considering, external considering is very important. And you can work on that most any time, in your life. Throughout each day, we have many opportunities to internally consider it. and externally consider it. Every time we internally consider it, when something goes wrong in our lives, we get angry, we get frustrated. By the end of the day, we're exhausted with really no reason to be exhausted other than that expenditure of unnecessary energy. Okay, I think we'll go into the meditation aspect of the work. Most groups, most people who have been in the work for many, many years, they have what is called a morning sitting. And it is a meditation. My own definition of meditation is the exercise of being still in the mind, the emotions, the body, and our feelings. To keep everything still, keep your body relaxed. Our sitting consists of a posture. We can sit on a cushion with our legs in the lotus position. Hands are usually together like this, with our thumbs touching on our lap. We keep our spine straight and our head and neck straight, because keeping the neck straight helps to balance the energy flow, to keep it unobstructed, so the energy that goes up and down the spine doesn't curve like so. If your back is, if you're slouching, or if you're this way, it goes straight up and down. The energy flows more freely. And if we're sitting in the lotus position on a cushion, try to make sure that your knees are below the heart, below the level of the heart. Eyes are closed. The exercise consists of what we call, what I call, and what most people call the circulating sensing exercise, where we first of all try and find our tensions in the body and relax each part of the body, the arm, the leg, the shoulders, the torso, and just let that energy, all that tension, drain to the lower extremity. Be sure you're in an environment which is conducive to being quiet, that is very peaceful, because you don't want to have any interference or distractions. We usually begin with sensing our right arm. Now, what does that mean? We keep our arm relaxed. We are aware of the arm. We are aware of the skin, the muscles. We are aware of the whole arm. And we start by sensing it in parts: the shoulder, the upper arm, the elbow, the forearm, the hand, the fingers. And get to know it. Just sense it. Just know it is there. Just do this by placing your attention on those parts and sensing it. Just know it is there. Now, there's a difference between feeling and tension. You try to differentiate between the two. Feeling is usually associated in this case with touch or contact with, if the arm is resting on your leg, sensing the contact. But that's not the same thing as sensing. Sensing is just being aware of the arm, getting to know it. Know it is there. You kind of, in a way, kind of feel what is underneath and going on in your arm, the muscles, the bone, the blood circulation. Just be aware of it. And then do the same thing with your right leg, starting with the upper leg, the knee, the lower leg, the foot, the toes, and just knowing it is there without really feeling it. It's just knowing its presence. And then you switch to the left leg, do the same, and the right arm doing the same. And then what we usually do, we repeat this alternately. After you do one cycle, finishing with the left arm, you do it again, but this time you start with the right leg and then go with the left leg, the left arm, and then you go to the right arm again, starting another cycle. But this time you pass the right leg and go to the left. And you do this cycle several times. This is called the circulation sensing exercise. It can last usually from 15 minutes, sometimes 20. People usually sometimes like set like this for a long period of time, maybe an hour. And I forgot to mention the breath. Be present to your breathing. There are variations of this exercise. Some involve more after you do a particular circulation, where you go up the spine, over the head, down the front. Again, you're eventually sensing the whole body. You're sensing the solar plexus, the heart, the navel, the groin area. This is the circulation sensing exercise, what's called the sitting. And most group practitioners do this in the morning after they wake up, which is a good time to do it because you don't have the day interfering which can start right from the very minute your feet hit the floor. So it's good to do this at the very beginning of the day when you wake up. Now, people may tend to fall asleep doing this exercise. It does happen. But at the same time, if you do it long enough, people do have some experiences. And I can only speak from my own experience. It's happened 3 times. And I've been in the Gurdjieff work since 1976. And this began just a few years ago. I had the first experience. And I thought I had fallen asleep. But I woke up, but it was strange because I opened my eyes. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. And then I didn't know how, I thought maybe I had been asleep, but I wasn't. I asked, how long was I out? And someone replied, well, about 30 seconds to a minute. But I tell you, I had no sense of time. I could have been out for 3 hours for all I knew. But we did these exercises as a group. It was in a group setting. So I thought I had fallen asleep. But it happened again a second time, and then again a third time. The third time it happened, I remember mumbling something to myself, several words. But it was like somebody else was talking. I don't think it was anything profound, but it was just a simple statement. And again, I thought I had fallen asleep, but by this time I began to get suspicious. And so I actually entered a state, call it a timeless state. Could have been, for all I knew, an hour or two. When I opened my eyes, at first I did not know or recognize where I was. And then the impression started to come in through my eyes and the ears, and in a few seconds I knew where I was and so forth. But I read in a book that this is similar to the samadhi experience, where you're really on the verge of nothingness, knowing nothing, and being on the border of something. But I haven't had any experiences since. But it was just a taste. It was just a taste of what is possible. People will have experiences everybody will have their own experience. And if anybody wishes to talk about it, they can find a senior leader or a senior person in the group work to talk to them about it if you wish. But that experience is your own. Nobody else can really comment on it unless there is a master somewhere available. So the experience is your own. It's a taste of what can be, and it's nothing to be fearful of. People have experiences during settings, but it's rare, I think. But they don't know what to how to report on it or who to talk to. But it's nothing to be fearful of. But the experience is your own, and whatever happens is natural. And if you fall asleep, you'll know you fell asleep. Just don't start snoring and waking up other people. Does anybody have any comments on the setting exercise?
I just have a comment that doing these sittings with the sensings really open us up to remembering that we are not this body, and that's what I think is, for me, really important. And it seems to have increased my ability to sense things in normal everyday life as well.
Absolutely.
And so, which also leads to becoming more aware of inner and external considering, and it's just part of everything. But this is an important part of
it. Is we need to know our body, and we will discover that we are not our body. I am not my body. When something happens to me physically, it doesn't happen to me, it happens to my body. It happens to Harry. And as you say, it helps us to develop our sensing abilities, which is very important. There was one time when I was so relaxed after a setting. I was, I thought I was ill. I thought I was coming down with a bug or something because I was too relaxed. I didn't feel right. But what it was, that's what it was. All the tension was gone. I was so relaxed. My body wasn't used to it. And I thought I was coming down with the flu or something. So the body will change in time. It will be more relaxed, less tension, and your body will be more aware of its position, or you will be more aware of its position in life as you walk through the day, touch people, interact with people, and your sensing abilities will improve. Someone had a question during the week, and I emailed the response. And this had to do with inner talking. And there are techniques of meditation to alleviate the inner chatter, the inner talking, the inner critic. But for the most part, and on page 60, there are some suggestions on how to go about doing that. Most everybody, including myself, has issues with inner talking. Somebody's always talking. And it may be related to association. It may be related to the false eyes that are talking because you are trying to work on yourself. And these false eyes don't want you to work on yourself because they feel threatened. And so they start this inner chatter, this inner criticizing. And it may stem from actually childhood, based on our upbringing and exposure to the education system and so forth. The inner critic, in my own experience, is really bad. Has been really bad. And I read in as I've read in Beelzebub towards the end of the book, he talks about the inner tyrant. Now that has many different meanings, as most of his um, articles or topics have. The inner critic or the inner tyrant is my description of my inner critic, and it's always there. It's always in the form of somebody I have known in the past, one or two people, but that's just by association, just by simply putting a face on it. But it's a group of inner eyes that really do not want to see me improve my being, to improve my level of man number 1, 2, 3, or 4. And there are many exercises listed on page 60. Some of them are very good. Whatever works for you is fine. In fact, that's all anybody can suggest. What works for you is fine. The Gurdjieff suggested in Beelzebub, on the topic of the inner tyrant, the best thing to do is just to stop. That's it, just to stop. Make super effort, work on yourself, stop. And you can find your own methods of alleviating this inner tyrant, this inner chatter, this inner talking, by changing your centers, by doing something constructive, even taking a cold bath or a hot shower, or doing what I call idiot relief. You know, watch a comedy on TV, read a good book, do whatever you can to change your centers. And you can argue with this inner tyrant, this inner chatter, this inner eye. But in my case, which is one of the suggestions listed on page 60, in my own experience, I just end up arguing with it. I just end up arguing with my false eye, and it doesn't resolve anything. So that part doesn't work. So whatever works for you, you have to discover for yourself. But this can be really draining. And for some people, and myself, it's been a nuisance. Go ahead.
I just want to say something about just looking at this list. What often happens for me is number 6, I think it says, who is this? Like, when I notice that I'm being judgmental or critical or, being any kind of thought that I, in my outer mind think I'm not capable of, then I always try to relate it to, well, if that's not me, who is it, and where did this come from? And 9 times out of 10, it's my parents.
Mm-hmm. Sure, it comes from our childhood, and it's in our essence. That's why it's so strong. Mm-hmm. And when you say, "Who is this?" Well, it's you. The inner talking, the inner eyes, the inner critic is always you. It is you. It's in you, and it'll be there for a long, long, long time until we begin to work on it, and we can. And this is, I suppose, a good example of this. If you remember the picture, the painting of St. George and the dragon. George has the spear at the dragon's throat, as if he was killing it, ready to kill it. But he's not killing it. He's taming it. He has it under control. This is the dragon within ourselves. And St. George is our higher being that wish to improve ourselves, work on ourselves. And this is taming our dragon, the inner chatter, the inner tyrant, what I call the inner tyrant. Now remember, what I call the inner tyrant may be different from what Gurdjieff actually meant, but it can be taken that way. Towards the end of the chapter, there are many examples and many observations on people who have sensed, and it's probably worthwhile reading, but we'll all have our own story to tell. Speaking of stories, I thought I would spend time discussing the life of Gurdjieff, who he was, what he did, where he went, and so forth. Many people, even people who think they have known him, really did not know him. The only thing of historic significance that we can describe as factual was that he was born. And after that, most of the stories are rather vague. Most of the histories are rather vague, but they all have some truth in them. Gurdjieff was born in Alexandropol, Russia, Armenia, in 1866. It is now known by its ancient name of Gyumri. And on the west of Armenia is the country of Turkey. To the north is Georgia, part of Russia, and to the west and the south is Azerbaijan. And he was born in a particular time that was very, very extraordinary. Around the whole city of Alexandropol, there were 7 or 8 different races, languages, religions. There were Russians, there were Armenians, there were Turks, and the influences that were under from that time period were extraordinary. The education he had was in a monastery run by Father Borsch, and he studied medicine, sciences, math, philosophy. And being in that time period, he got a chance also to witness many, many different extraordinary phenomena, unexplained phenomena. I think you could call it miracles or whatever, which nobody could really explain to him in a satisfactory way, including the scientists at that time, of the educated people. Now, his father was an ashok, which is a storyteller. He was also a carpenter and a farmer. And one of the things his father would tell him, he would tell him of the ancient story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the equivalent of the Great Flood in Noah's time, but it was, I believe, a previous flood. And the story he told was brought down word by word, down through the centuries and the millennia, unchanged by Ashoks before him, long before him, and to the time of Gurdjieff. And this is how they preserve knowledge and ancient wisdom, by telling the stories handed down from his father and the father before him and father before him, all the way back to the beginning. And we're talking about thousands of years here. The story been identically the same. And it was later, after Gurdjieff discovered the stone or the tablets describing the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it was almost identical word for word. This is, they discovered, I think, in Babylon, but I'm not sure. And the story was, and this is the first time the world heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh after they discovered this artifact. And so he looked at it and he was amazed, because he had already known of the story, and as told by his father. So he lived under in very, very extraordinary times. And during this time, he began to wonder, what is life? Why are we here? Why is there life on Earth? And what are we supposed to do? What is the purpose of life? And not only life, but in man in particular, why are we here? These are questions that precipitated his search for such meanings. And he found other people with similar questions, and they formed a group called the Seekers of Truth, and they traveled to many, many different places throughout the East, the Middle East, the Far East, Egypt, India, and even in Tibet, in search for ancient wisdom and perhaps some monasteries that may have answers to these questions. And they even did some archaeological excavations and search. And he visited the Sufis, the Buddhists, the Essenes. There are a few of them still around. These are the Essenes who are part of the esoteric Christianity that we hear about so much. Also, there was a legendary monastery that some people are still trying to find today, called the Sarmoon Brotherhood. And supposedly, Gurdjieff found this monastery, and we think it may have actually existed, but maybe it possibly under a different name and more of a Sufi type of a monastery. But when you consider all these religions, the Sufis, the Buddhists, esoteric Christianity, and others, Hinduism, and they, on the surface, they all seem to be very different. But when you get into the inner meanings or the esoteric meanings behind these teachings of all religions, if they are true religions, you will find a common thread that is unchanged and is so it's all the same. So he did find this particular monastery, and they was eventually given a task to bring the wisdom of the East and merge it with the science and the techniques of the West, so that people today who don't have the opportunity to go to a monastery or to become a lifelong pupil of a guru, I'm not referring to Gurdjieff as I'm talking to about more Indian mystics. But we can't do that. We have to work in life. The times have changed. So he made his teaching available for people like us can understand it without delving into the religions and having to deal with the external part of religions day by day. But the inner meaning, what really matters, how to learn what life is about and why we are here and what our purpose is in life. That was his task and aim in life, also to stop war and to bring actually a new conception of our understanding of God. It's just a new conception, a new understanding. It's not saying there's a different God or anything like that. But he also introduced the symbol, the Enneagram, which is an extraordinary symbol. That symbol does not appear exactly as it is anywhere else in history. So he got it from somewhere. There are other symbols that are similar to it, but it's not the same. This one is truly extraordinary, dealing with the law of 3 and the law of 7. But except once, it was discovered, I don't know when it was discovered, but it's in one of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings called the Vitruvian Man. Now, in da Vinci's time, what precipitated the Renaissance, the age of Renaissance in Italy, was the Medici family, who were very wealthy, and they traveled to the Far East and beyond. They brought back tremendous knowledge, and they incorporated in the Renaissance changes in their buildings with new architecture, new paintings, medicines, and many, many other discoveries. But in particular, Da Vinci somehow was introduced to it. And he drew what's called the Vitruvian Man. Actually, the symbol as he drew it is also a square and a circle. It's called the squaring of the circle, or the circling of the square. But if you look at it closely, you can see, besides having the law of proportions, and you can actually relate other diagrams into this, but then specifically, what brings to mind is the Enneagram, and you can see it the way his arms are positioned. And if you study it long enough, because he isn't positioned exactly like the Enneagram, but you can study it with a square that's in the original symbol. And actually, the original symbol, where his head is, actually where the lines cross is actually in his throat, in the thyroid area. It's a very powerful area of the body. And his arms are more in position with the points of 1 and 8. And you can see his feet are in the position of 4 and 5. And his feet represents the bridge. So this is evidence that a lot of people believe that the Medici family found the Enneagram and brought it to the West during that time period. But it wasn't known until the time of Gurdjieff, when he introduced it, as to what it actually looked like. So this is an example of objective art, as many of Da Vinci's works have been.
Harry, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you mentioned the square, where is the square?
Okay, can everybody see it clearly? And you can see where the lines, this is my own drawing. You can see where the lines, the line cross at the neck area and where the square is.
It's interesting to me because, I do feng shui, and I always have to square the house off. And I never realized that the Enneagram could be squared as well. And I see how that works. So, very interesting.
It is. Now, Gurdjieff did not really make his appearance into the West until about 1911, after he completed his searches. And he went to Moscow. And there he advertised and selected, and people that were scientists, authors, artists, and philosophers of that time, psychologists. And he formed a group of people who had the same questions, and that was interested in his ideas. And this was called the first group. Among those were Madame de Hartmann, Madame de Salzmann, P.D. Ouspensky, and others. And during that time, was just prior to the Russian Revolution. He met his, he was presented to the court of Nicholas Tsar Nicholas of Russia, and Tsarina Alexandria. One of the countesses in their court was Julia Osipovna, who later became, was more known as Madame Ostrovska, and they married. And during that time, the Russian court, the queen and the princess and others were greatly under the influence of Gregory Rasputin, who is known as the mad monk, and that he was evil. And, he tried to influence the political affairs and the decisions of the Tsar, through his family. And a lot of people in politics at that time hated Rasputin and tried to discredit him, and eventually tried several times to assassinate him before they eventually succeeded. And before they eventually assassinated him, they asked Gurdjieff, as I understand it, this may not be true, but it's supported by circumstantial evidence, I guess, or historically through word of mouth, that they asked Gurdjieff to intervene and help remove Gregory Rasputin. But Gurdjieff refused to do this. We don't know exactly why. I don't think it's been stated as to why he refused. But in my own speculation, and it's just speculation, that it may be that they were both from the same school, because they were both very, very powerful and influential beings in their own right. A lot of people through the years believed Gurdjieff himself was evil because of the way he presented his work. And I'll get into that shortly. And how he did not want to be seen as a leader, as a messiah in quotation marks, and he did not want to have any doctrine or dogma in the system. So he made things very, very difficult for his students later on. First of all, when you're in the work, you're in the work to work on yourselves. You work with other people and you work for the work. There is no dogma, there is no doctrine. It's not a cult, because you can leave anytime you want, no questions asked. And nobody asks for your life savings or you to leave your home and your family. But he made it very, very difficult, because people knew that. They were there with that intention, because they wanted to be shown what they were like and to see themselves as other people see them. And so there were some extraordinary, severe conditions at times imposed upon some of his students to make them see themselves and to work on themselves. But it was not all harsh and all violent or anything like that. But it was just, Gurdjieff was a mirror. So people could see themselves as they were and to work on themselves, because they wished to change their being, and they wished to, learn what they could from Gurdjieff. The time came when Gurdjieff decided to close his institute in France, where he eventually settled. And people were living in the institute at the time. There was maybe 20 or 30 or 40 people, I don't know. But the time came for them to leave, and they had to go back into the world, so to speak, and to teach what they have learned and carry on the work as they understood it, and for other people. A lot of people didn't want to leave Gurdjieff, so he made the conditions necessary for them to leave. And it was difficult, and eventually it was done. There were still quite a few that refused to leave, but anyway. But that's when he changed his teaching, verbal teachings of the work of the Fourth Way, and he started to write. And that's when he wrote All and Everything Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. A great piece of objective work, as it's known by. And this was in the mid-1920s, and for the next 20 years, and until he died in 1949, this is what he did: revised it, changed it, to see how particular people of different countries reacted to it, and whether if it was made too easy for them to understand, he would rewrite it and make it more difficult. This is how he worked. After he closed the institute and after he sold it, he lived in Paris and was there during the entire German occupation, still having meetings with some of his students, but on a much smaller level. It was in an apartment in Paris. And he was pretty much left alone by the Nazis. And of course, I suppose at the same time, the people had to be careful what they talked about and all this and that. But I think the Nazis probably knew he was there, but they left him alone. And he passed away on October 29th, 1949. And that's pretty much, the story of Gurdjieff and a little bit about his life.
I missed some of the meetings. Has anyone mentioned the All and Everything conferences?
They're held once a year at different locations in the United States and Europe. The one coming up in April is in London or somewhere in England. Next year, I suspect it will be again in the United States somewhere, possibly, maybe even Portland, Maine. We've had a couple of conferences in the past. And last year it was held on the West Coast in Seattle. And anybody is welcome to come and participate and to hear what papers are being presented and discussed based on the writings of Gurdjieff. And there have been some very fascinating reports, papers on Gurdjieff's literature.
I was at the last two that were in New England, and wonderful, because I'm still in touch with people from all over the world because of that conference. And
that's great.
Lots of great information.
We were considering starting another group online that some people who have already been introduced to the teachings could participate in. The format would be different, more instructional, more in line with a work group, but being on the internet. Now, the internet is still experimental with trying to get a good group on continually. The Theosophical Society has a couple of groups. There are some editions that are recommended. The 1950 edition is still in use, very, very popular. The one in the 1999 edition, published by Arcana, is very inclusive, has some addendums that have been corrected, spelling, whatever. And also, I think there's one chapter that had been eliminated from the 1950 edition that's available in the 1999 edition. There is one that is controversial, but it's was authorized by Gurdjieff. It took a long time to come about and too long to explain the reason here, but it's the 1992 edition, which is somewhat condensed, not by much though, but it's different. But it's designed for the American English people. And there are several different translations of the book, and it's designed for the particular type of people: the French, the Russian, the English, and the American. And they all have different ways of comprehending what it is he's trying to present. And just to say, it's very, very difficult to read, very, very difficult. The words are long and they are strange, but he tells you at the beginning how to read it. And if you keep in mind, it's by picture form, what he describes as picture form mentation. In other words, the words, through association, I suppose, develop a picture in your mind in a certain form, in a certain way of thinking about it. And it's designed specifically for a certain reader of a certain language and country. But I would recommend the 1950 edition, 1999 edition.
Thank you so much, Harry, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.